Good afternoon. I'm Jonathan Moore, and I serve as the Chief Strategy Officer at the Council of Chief State School Officers. We know that one of the most urgent educational issues of our time is ensuring equitable access to an excellent advanced mathematics education for all students. National achievement data shows clear achievement gaps across student populations, and the pandemic has only exacerbated these low levels of student achievement and gaps. States are beginning to update their math content standards, and legislatures have passed laws to respond to and improve pre-K through 12 math achievement. Today, we're here with state education agency leaders who are focusing on mathematics as a key lever for student success, and we're going to learn more about how they are approaching creating conditions to cultivate achievement in math in their states. I am joined by three esteemed panelists, and to know them is to know their passion for education and the commitment to the communities they serve. First, we have Kirsten Baesler, who serves as State Superintendent of the North Dakota Department of Public Instruction and also President of the CCSSO Board of Directors. Superintendent Baesler was first elected in 2012, re-elected to her third term in 2020. Before assuming office, she served for 24 years in the Bismarck Public School System, where she held various roles. We're also joined by Catherine Truitt, State Superintendent of Public Instruction of the North Carolina Department of Education. Superintendent Truitt began her service in 2021. Prior to her service, she was Chancellor of Western Governors University in North Carolina. We're also joined by Dr. Eric Mackey, Alabama State Superintendent of Education. Mackey began his service in 2018. Prior to serving as state superintendent, he was the executive director of the School Superintendents of Alabama. Please give a virtual welcome to our panelists. Given the time that we have, and I know we want to hear from our phenomenal leaders, we're going to dive right in. So I'm going to turn it over to you first, Superintendent Baesler. Tell us about what is your vision for how you want students to learn mathematics in North Dakota?
Thanks so much, Dr. Moore, for having us. Welcome. Good to see you, Superintendent Truitt and Superintendent Mackey. It's good to be here with you. This is such an important conversation. And so, as we talk about what our commitment to our families and our commitment to our taxpayers both Superintendent Truitt and I are both elected, but even in appointed positions or hired positions, we have that commitment. And that's a commitment that we take very seriously as we lead our states and we lead our state school systems. And so, simply put, I think the unconditional and unwritten, unspoken commitment that we have to every one of those constituents within our states is that when our students leave our systems, that they will be able to not only know and do math, but to understand mathematics to a level that it's useful in their everyday lives as they become successful citizens. And so ever since I have been, a classroom teacher, I knew that was my commitment to every parent, every family member that dropped off their child at our doorsteps. Number one, that you would return them safely at the end of the day, and that you would accomplish the mission that we have as school systems, and that is to teach our students to be able to read and write and communicate and think critically, problem solve, be curious, and absolutely be able to do math. And so that it's as simple as that for me. I mean, we could talk a lot about our goals. I could talk to you a lot about statistics and data and closing achievement gaps. But in North Dakota, I mean, that's all inclusive. When we say all students leave our systems able to do those things because we fulfilled our commitment to the people that we serve, and most importantly, the commitment to the children we serve that are in our systems, that's my vision. And we're not going to stop until we are able to say that we have arrived and all students are able to do math along with all of the other things that I mentioned.
Thank you, Superintendent Baesler. We're certainly going to get to those other things that you mentioned, but it certainly is great to hear about the vision you have for the children you serve in North Dakota. I want to turn the same question over to Superintendent Truitt. What is your vision for how students learn math in North Carolina?
Well, it's everything Superintendent Baesler said, and I believe that I would add to that we need to change the way we talk about math. I was horrified to learn over the summer with all of the commotion around the Barbie movie. I read someplace that in 1996, Mattel came out with a teen Barbie who spoke and said, gee, math is hard. And so there was so much pushback that they ended up getting rid of the doll, thank goodness. But I think that we have normalized in our country that it's okay to not be good in math, and that I think up until recently, and perhaps because the pandemic has shed so much light on this, we are graduating high school seniors with deficits in basic math skills. And so I think that when I think about my vision for how how we're going to solve this, I want to start with the what. What are we trying to solve? And I think it goes back to this idea that we are not, there's no sense of urgency, I don't think, with math the way we're seeing with literacy. And we have to start from a point of the goal being that all students are successful in Algebra 1, that there is Algebra 1 readiness, because there's some predictive validity with being proficient in Algebra 1 in terms of opportunities for post-secondary work, whether it's in the military or a 4-year or a 2-year degree. And so I think recognizing that we need to align our goals with math to what is going to be expected for the workforce is a big part of my vision.
Thank you, Superintendent Truitt. I think similar to Superintendent Baesler, we're starting to build this context around a culture, right, of mathematics, both inside and outside of the classroom. But Superintendent Mackey, can you tell us a little bit about your vision for mathematics and the students you serve in Alabama?
Absolutely. Well, first I would say amen to my colleagues, because all of those things are things we agree, that are important here in Alabama. But I'm going to do what Superintendent Truitt did and kind of build on the base of what's already been said. So one thing is we often talk about reading, because reading, we know, is important for every child. Like, everybody in this country seems to understand that if a person's going to be a successful adult, no matter what path they follow, they need to be able to read at a pretty proficient level. As the superintendents Truitt and Baesler just said, people don't necessarily feel that way about math. People have the idea that I can say, oh, I'm not good at math, and therefore I don't really have to work hard to be a good math student. But a step further, that unfortunately is also true with our teachers. So our teachers can say, oh, I'm not really a math person. And so we are perpetuating this image from the top down. We're telling our students, look at me, I'm a successful adult, I'm not good at math, so you don't have to be good at math either. So we're sending the wrong message, where we do need every student algebra ready, and we need every student, at the very least, to be successful in Algebra 1. I often say to people, math is not about solving math problems. Math is about solving problems. And so we have to approach it in a different way. It's not about doing the old rote worksheets. Now, those have their place, because students need to obviously learn to work algorithms. They need to understand how to actually do the math. But more importantly, math is a process of thinking. It's about reasoning. It's about logic. It's about finding a solution to a problem. And so if we approach it in that way, I think students will find math interesting. Math is not something to be dreaded. Math is something to be explored. And I'm going to make one more example to reading. And that's we all know that probably when we were in elementary school, learning phonics and learning the basics of grammar were not our most fun subjects. Like, I don't know anybody, maybe there are some folks out there, I'm not an English major, but maybe some folks would be out there, but most people are not going to say, oh, the thing I most enjoyed in school was diagramming sentences or learning basic grammar. But if we get past that and we introduce students to novels, to the selections they want to read, to Sports Illustrated, whatever it is, they can find something that they apply reading to that they enjoy. And when you say, what do we want students to understand about math? That's what I want. I want us to get to the place that students get past the mundane part of it, where they enjoy math, where they see how it can be applied in their everyday life, and they find ways to apply it all around. And there are ways to apply math in everyday life. the old story is, that you never use math. Well, that's not true. You can use that logic and reasoning that we learn through mathematics every day in all of our careers. So that's what we're hoping for, that students kind of catch the passion for math that we hope they catch for reading. And I think we're driving down dual lanes here, and we have to bring the urgency, as has already been said, bring the urgency to mathematics that we have with reading across this country.
That's very helpful, and it's resonating with me, and I hope it's resonating with our viewers, this idea of this culture of mathematics. Superintendent Baesler, a question for you. North Dakota, right, a leader in many things, particularly competency-based education. Can you talk to us a little bit about how you went about and are going about identifying those biggest opportunities for innovation?
Thank you so much. I appreciate that question very much. As I said in my opening, comments were that it's more than just access to. And as a state superintendent, I had originally thought, okay, I set high standards, I get a quality assessment that is aligned to those standards, and I provide support to our school districts. And that's where the state role is. It's so much more than that. Now I know clearly that math, because it is so cumulative, it is necessary for it to be personalized. It is necessary for us, and Superintendent Mackey touched on that for a different reason. Personalization for passion and drive and motivation, but also personalized to ensure that we address that unfinished learning that is necessary. And so similar to the galvanizing moment when Emily Hanford had, began her series of reporting that resulted in eventually the Sold the Story. But as she was doing those independent, so too was a white paper that I read by Joel Rose it helped me understand that iceberg problem. And that was a moment that any layperson, that paper really outlines any layperson, any state superintendent, any district leader, how important the foundational learning of math is. It's very, very hard to understand percentages in your later years if you don't understand decimals. And so that was truly, I think, a very simple way. Similarly, where Emily Hanford's work, that was a work for me. And that tied in very well to the concept and the movement that we have been moving towards in North Dakota, the personalized competency-based learning. And we've got to empower our teachers, our school systems to do that. I will, simply say with that, but that too isn't simple. Changing from a traditional model of bells and classrooms to a personalized competency-based model is hard. We need to continue. This morning, I'm in Fargo, North Dakota right now because I launched our learning network. After 10 years of work led by the SEA and many partners, national partners, we have handed off the idea of competency personalized based because it is so mature now in North Dakota that the grassroots network of district and building leaders have said, we've got it. Thank you, state. And I think that's where state education agencies are able to do those types of innovative incubators, grow it, mature it, scale, and cultivate the opportunity, and then scale it to other school districts till finally you hand it off to actually the people that will be there long after we as elected officials leave our offices. It becomes the culture of the way that we do school in this state. That's where we're at now. And I think if we are going to make progress on helping our students master and understand mathematics, we have to have that culture and that understanding of it's not whether you're good at it and doing the process and the skills. It's about the deep understanding that only personalization through innovation is going to get us.
Thank you, Superintendent Baesler. I think that really speaks to a lever for innovation, this idea of personalizing math to the individual child, given that it is cumulative. You all talked about and sharing your visions collectively about the duality that exists between how the collective we approach math and English language arts. So Superintendent Mackey, my question to you is, in the absence of clear guidance and consensus and research, if you will, how are you finding what you need as you think about how to approach mathematics in your state? Where are you turning to build the capacity of those you're supporting?
Well, it's not easy. And again, this comparison goes back to reading. So there's been a great deal of work done on reading really over the past 50 years, but more intensely since the National Reading Panel report in the late 90s. And we've really focused. And there's been a lot of universities, a lot of private companies that have done really good research on what it takes for a child to become a good reader and what kinds of professional development we need for teachers, what kind of pre-service programs we need in our colleges of education and university system, and what materials and training we need, and what kinds of assessments we need around reading. So we're implementing a new law in Alabama called the Alabama Numeracy Act that came into being 2 years ago. We're very proud of it. I have a person now in my office that leads an Office of Mathematics Improvement. She has a strong staff of about a dozen people around her, and we're working on supporting our districts. But to go back to your question and to my comparison, we're finding the same things are not there. So we've said, you know what, we want a strong assessment for our pre-service teachers that shows they are ready to go in the classroom and teach mathematics in elementary schools. Now we have an assessment like that for reading. We think, I won't go into which vendor, but we feel we looked at that a few years ago. We picked an assessment we feel really good about. In mathematics, basically the national testing companies told us, we haven't gone down that road yet. We're willing to go down that road with you, but we don't actually have that foundations assessment in place. And so we're working with multiple vendors right now about what could that look like, and we'll go through that RFP and development process. But of course, that goes back to that takes time, and all the states, I'm sure, are trying to do these same things. The same way with the screeners. Some of the very basic screeners for dyscalculia and other problems in mathematics are similar to what we deal with in reading with dyslexia. The screeners are not, there are some out there, but they're not as well developed, they're not as mature as what we see in reading. So the materials, the research, the pre-service, it's not there. Now it's being built, and we need to get there, and I think we will get there in time. I think that won't take one state. Alabama relatively is pretty small. We have about 750,000 students. So this is going to take multiple states pushing together to get the momentum to make this move. And I think it can move really fast if we get enough states, pushing in the same direction. But we've not all gotten there. And then the last thing I want to say on that is, unfortunately, as we went through the reading wars, we also have math wars. So there's not even complete agreement on, like when I talk about really good pre-service instruction and an assessment to show that those teachers graduating out of college, they're ready to go into the classroom. Well, there's some disagreement about what that means, because there's still some disagreement about what it takes. Not about, 2 + 2 is 4. We know that. But the kinds of training that make teachers really good math teachers, there's still some disagreement around that. So we're also having to move through that with our colleges and universities, because not everybody at the university system agrees what it takes to be a good math teacher. And we have 2 committees of practitioners working. We have one in higher ed and one in elementary school. Now, high school is a whole different animal. I know we'll get to talk about that. But right now we're focusing on elementary and middle school to get students ready for mathematics. And so we're focusing on those prep programs for elementary and middle schools also. And we have 2 task forces that are working to pull those things together. I do think the tide is coming in, and the vendors, both the private resources and also our institutions of higher ed, are starting to say, hey, we have to really focus on better resources for schools in mathematics. And I hope that tide continues to come in and much faster for all of us.
Dr. Moore, can I respond to that? Because I think Superintendent Mackey brings up some very, very, very good points. really the lack of resources and the lack of research that is out there for mathematics, maybe even education in general, but specifically in mathematics. We are looking for those. And yes, we can come together as states, a network of states, but I truly believe that we do need some assistance in research and development. And I think it would be helpful as we tackle this problem to have an accelerator in R&D. Similar, we're North Carolina, North Dakota, Alabama, certainly big defense states, and they have the DARPA for defense research. They have ARPA-E for energy, which is very important for us and in an energy state like North Dakota. We need something similar in this arena to help us accelerate, to help those universities, those coalition of states come together. And I think back to the I3 grants. That was very helpful, very important. But one of the things that I remember about the I3 grants is that we also need to, both Superintendent Truitt and Superintendent Mackey mentioned the element of time. It's going to take time. And as we talk about the unfinished learning, specifically in the cumulative subject content area of math, it's going to take time for our teachers to personalize the learning, be a 7th grade teacher, and shore up the unfinished learning that may have existed in 3rd or 4th grade. So when we do the R&D, to accelerate it and provide some accelerator for it to coalesce around this problem, and also set up an R&D model that allows the learning to be measured in a way that is outside of just the standard grade level. And so I think that those are two important things in the context of this conversation, and research and resources.
That's very helpful. I'm hearing those themes of not only personalization, but as we're starting to get into some key levers, I'm hearing the identification of research and development. Superintendent Truitt, when we think about additional levers, we know that there are state standards and policies and curriculum and professional learning, many levers that can be pulled on to advance mathematics achievement. Thinking about your context, what would you say are some of the essential conditions, key conditions to advance and accelerate mathematics learning?
Yeah, that's such an important question. And I think, my colleagues have really touched on so much of that. So I'll just continue to build on what they said. I think that the conditions have to start with acknowledging that in our current system, as Superintendent Baesler said, we don't personalize instruction, and we especially don't personalize it in math because the time is fixed and the learning is variable, and it should really be the other way around. If the 4 of us were to take a quiz on multiplying fractions, and we got a 60, 70, 80, 90 respectively, we would all still have gaps, but it would be time for the teacher to move on and go to the next to the next unit. And so this idea that we're covering, teachers are still expected to cover all of this material, and students, just fall where they may, is a function of the way our system exists. I want to also build on what Superintendent Mackey said about the developing math wars. I'm reading so much about this, and I think that there's a faction of folks out there, right or wrong, who are trying to align problems in math with problems in reading, and that the solutions may look the same. And I'm reading that this is becoming kind of team algorithm versus team exploratory. There's one group that wants to function on what Eric called the grammar of early math, right? It's learning those math facts, and then there's this other team that's saying, no, it's more, students need to build meaning and explore math, and it shouldn't be this drudgery with worksheets, et cetera. And the truth is that, as my colleagues have stated, there is no causal research linking certain math instructional practices with student success, except for maybe something we can all agree on, which is that kids have to know their math facts in order to get to the application of any of this. And so while I don't disagree with the idea that systematic and explicit, that should sound familiar to people who are doing this and reading, systematic and explicit instruction in math, as we are shifting to in reading, is important. But there also has to be, just like with early literacy, it doesn't stop with phonics instruction, right? You once kids are decoding, you add in the vocabulary, the fluency, and the comprehension. It's got to be the same with math. And so I think that this idea that when we think about the conditions, back to your question about what are necessary, it has to be the recognition that we need to move towards a competency-based approach. And I think all of education should be competency-based, but can we at least start with math? Because it certainly makes the most sense there. And then we need to do the research that's already been described. I'll tell you, there's a lot going on right now with AI instruction in math. And if any of our viewers have not checked out Khanmigo, which is Khan Academy's AI assisted platform, it is amazing. And it allows for that personalization before we get to the policy work that can get us to a competency-based approach. We're much further behind with that in North Carolina than in North Dakota. And so, we've got our work cut out for us here. It is part of my strategic plan here in North Carolina. But, in the meantime, there are lots of tools out there in AI that we should not be afraid of that can help provide the personalization. And without that personalization, I just don't see how we're going to get all kids to that standard that we've mentioned of Algebra 1 readiness.
Yeah. And can I jump just really quick, Jonathan, into that? I just want to, again, another amen, because that is so true about the gaps. And, one of us making a 60, 70, 80, 90, and we all have these gaps. And the gaps in mathematics, I'm going to profess that maybe some would argue with this, but they can be a lot worse cumulatively than in other subjects. So if you make a 70 and a 70 and a 70 and a 70, if you get 70% of your math facts right for about 4 years in a row, you are really lost when you get to Algebra 1, because you've cumulatively developed a real problem. And that goes back to that personalized learning. Like, we really do need to know where those gaps are. What 30% did you not get in second and third and fourth grade? And then, I hate to use the word, but remediate. It's about going back to make sure that students fill in those gaps and they get the understanding. And there really is a place for both memorizing. Look, I'm all about memorizing math facts, but at the same time, understanding application, how to apply those. We don't need to be lost in the math wars. I think we all agree with that. There's a place for everybody to be sitting at this table, but the fact is, our students have to move forward. And unfortunately, I'm going to go back to one other thing, and I'll get unpreachy in a minute. But we do have this belief as a country that everybody needs to be able to read by the time they get out of high school. We have a belief that not everybody should have to do math. And so it's okay if some students just kind of fall behind and they never get it. And that, for the economy we want to build in the 2030s and beyond, that will put us at a serious disadvantage with the rest of the world. We absolutely have to make sure that our students are proficient in mathematics across the board, not just the top 10 or 20%.
So I think, Superintendent Mackey, I'm going to give you an amen too. But when we talk about those gaps and the personalization and the ability to go back and fill in those gaps, so our teachers know this, our building principals know this. And I think that's where, as state chiefs working with our federal counterparts, that's where our policy levers come into play. Because at this point, it's not that our teachers don't recognize that those gaps exist, 70, 70, 70. It's not that they don't want to go back and complete that unfinished learning, but it truly is the policies that come from every state house and, at the federal accountability system and assessment system that is actually preventing them from actually doing that to the extent that they want to do it, because they receive a child as an 8th grader. They know that that child is not going to be Algebra 1 ready, yet they are destined and bound and actually tethered to the 8th grade math standards and not a lot of ability. And so again, that's an assessment and an accountability. I think sometimes, well, too often we tie both of those together and talk about them as one thing. It's time to decouple those and talk about changes that we can make at the state level policy and the federal level policy to provide the opportunity in policy, the opportunity that our teachers need to actually be given the time, the grace, and the opportunity of innovation to go back and do that. I don't think they're doing it because they don't understand or recognize that it's there, but the system that we have in place, both in assessment and accountability, is not allowing them that. So, I want to do a lot of things that I used to do. I'm preaching now too. And it took me a long time to divorce myself or untrain myself of, well, when I was a teacher or when I was a building leader, and really begin to think, okay, what can I do now? And truly think about talking about what everybody else needs to do. What do I need to do in order to allow this opportunity for those classroom teachers? And so I think there's a whole opportunity for conversation, both at the state and federal level.
That's very helpful. Oh, as I'm listening to you all speak, there's so much that's resonating, but I'm hearing this idea of not only creating the conditions for learning, but I'm starting to sense the term infrastructure. It's not just about creating the conditions as I'm listening to you all, but how do you put the infrastructure in place? And I think that ties back to who do we partner with, who do we connect with, or who are those partners? And so I'd like to pivot a little bit to actually having a conversation about partners in this work. Superintendent Truitt, starting with you, as you think about the vision that you laid out and the work that's ahead, who are you relying on to help you advance the vision for mathematics education in North Carolina?
Well, I'll start with our work in learning recovery. So we partnered with SAS to do not a sample study, but we did an actual population study of all of our students, both before the pandemic and after the pandemic, and using a predictive model, figured out where all of our gaps were and shared that data with districts. So it was a very data-driven approach. And then we said, okay, here are the vetted resources that the state agency recommends that you use in order to close these gaps. And so that partnership with SAS and giving that data to districts allowed us to use ESSER dollars to do bridge academies for rising 6th graders and rising 9th graders, math summer boot camps, other kinds of summer programs. And to be honest, the biggest gains we saw from this past year's assessment data were in middle grades math, which is really where we targeted our resources. But I think moving forward and starting to shed this legacy thinking that Superintendent Baesler and Mackey are referencing, I'm looking really carefully at Excel and Ed's Algebra 1 Readiness Playbook. It is a very comprehensive approach to policymaking, and I am really anxious to get an early screener into the works, as Superintendent Mackey talked about. We don't have one in North Carolina. I think that is going to be absolutely key to getting us on the right trajectory. I would also say that we did talk with Khan Academy last week to look at what it might look like to give some professional development to our teachers to use AI-assisted learning to personalize the instruction that our students are getting. And I will say that as an education leader, I'm always going to go down the path of people, not programs. We have to work with partners who are going to help us equip our teachers so that they can, whether it's a knowledge gap for teachers or whether it's the system as the problem, as we've all said today, how are we going to make sure that we are strengthening our educators and equipping them with the tools and skills that they need to be effective in the classroom and free them from the constraints that the system has placed on them.
Thank you, Superintendent Truitt. I think I'm going to ask that same question of each of our panelists. Superintendent Baesler, as you think about how you're advancing the work in North Dakota, who are your partners? Who are you reaching out to or relying upon to help you advance your vision?
So we started this conversation as, in conjunction with personalized learning prior to the pandemic. We continued the conversation during the pandemic and afterwards, but essentially we knew that there were math innovation zones out there. We knew that it had success. And so we looked to people that had, assisted other state leaders. Texas had math innovation zones. We partnered with New Classrooms to actually talk about not using them as a provider of a supplemental tool, but to help us create the ability and the cover, if you will, to do supplemental learning as our teachers were in middle school, 6th, 7th, and 8th grade, but they recognized their students were missing some unfinished learning. How might we supplement that? And so we partnered with New Classrooms, but then as I spoke about what levers did I have, I also needed to talk to I needed some assistance in the governance model and helping us declare and identify as a state SEA working with local school districts, what can we do differently? So New Classrooms coming together with Delivery Associates, we actually then partnered with Montana and we spent it was an amazing weekend, like 4 days on a Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, in an unconditioned skyscraper on the 48th floor or something crazy like that in the middle of a heat wave. But by the end of that, we came out with this plan. And as a result, we are implementing Greater Math in North Dakota. And it's some pilot projects. Again, my idea of an SEA seeding an idea, building relationships, cultivating opportunity, and then scaling that growth. And so that's what we have going now. But it really is providing, some opportunity, some resources, holding our vendors accountable. It's a model that not only helps our teachers do supplemental learning, but it also meets a challenge is addressing a challenge that I've always had. When a partner and or a vendor, I use partners because in a state association like North Dakota or a state agency like North Dakota with only 81 employees, I need all the partners I can get to help us get this done. But sometimes, when a vendor will provide a product and say, we will provide X, Y, or Z number of hours of professional development. And we're never talking about outcomes. We never talk about student outcomes. And so this model of Greater Math in North Dakota is having a dual role of helping us provide cover for our middle school math teachers, to provide policy changes that were delivered. So the middle school math teachers were getting the cover and supplemental learning from New Classrooms type models, the governance in our partnership with Delivery Associates, and holding them accountable as well. We use the same partner that Catherine mentioned, SAS, to actually take a look at and use that predictive analytics to help us identify exactly which areas and how should our students how would they have done without the pandemic, and now what is their recovery looking like as it relates to the innovation and the pilots that are being done. Can't say enough about partnerships.
That's awesome. Superintendent Mackey, Alabama, who are you partnering with to advance your vision for mathematics?
Well, certainly all the above, and I will reiterate, we do have to work with our business partners out there. So we don't want to vilify them. I know sometimes we think it's this, the agency, and then there's the vendors, the business partners, but they really are. They're the ones who have a vested interest in helping us get this right. And I've talked to several of them, as Superintendents Truitt and Baesler have, that we know they really want to change the way, not just the old-fashioned, the math textbooks they sell us, but the technology, the research behind their stuff, the quality of the assessments. They want to help get this right too. And I think that as more and more of them get involved in the research and just the process of competition, we're going to see things get better. We're going to see better assessments. We're going to see better assessments for students and for teachers. and we're going to see better products coming out of the business community. We also are really partnering with higher education. So we cannot see higher ed. Sometimes just like in our local schools, people sometimes say it's the state agency's fault. Sometimes we're guilty of blaming higher ed for not sending us better prepared teachers or enough teachers or this or that. But they really are part of the solution, not part of the problem. And our higher ed partners have come to the table and said, we realize that the teachers we're turning out need to be better math teachers, and we want to help solve that. So as I mentioned, we have a higher ed task force working on just that. And we also have gone deep into coaching in this state. I know we all talk about instructional coaches. So the Numeracy Act that I mentioned, really the core of that is to place a mathematics coach in each school that has any part of grades K-8 by 2029. And so we'll end up hiring about 1,000 math coaches for elementary and middle schools over a period of time. And to be honest with you, my legislators, whom I really appreciate on this, they came to me and said, you know what, now's a pretty good time with money. We're just going to let you go out and hire all these people in 1 year. And unfortunately, I was not, no. Like, I cannot find 900 math coaches. Even if you gave me the money to hire them, we can't train that many people and do it successfully. We'll have a much better rollout if you let us go into first the lowest performing 5% of schools, and then we build that out to the lowest 25%, which is where we are now, and then we build on that as we go forward. So we're working with Diane Sweeney. I know Diane works in many states, and other folks have other models, but we use her coaching model in both reading and mathematics. So when our regional specialists go into a school, the principal, the reading coach, the math coach, if they've got another instructional coach, everybody's on the same page using the same language, because we have one state coaching model that we use in every school, in every program across the state. So I think that takes me to the last point, and that's that teachers are the solution. Superintendent Truitt, I think, said it. It's not about programs, it's about people. Look, and we're going to need technology to make this happen. I believe that. We're going to need AI to make this happen. But in the end, we're also going to need a teacher who leans over a desk with the child and helps the child understand how to rework that problem and where their mistake was, how to correct that mistake and move on. So it really is all about teachers understanding, and it's about teachers being willing to say to their coach, hey, I know my students are not doing that well, but it's because I need some help in how to teach them this skill. We've got to have teachers that are willing to say that, and then the coach comes in and helps build those skills. So lots of partners, because no school, no principal, no state agency can do this alone. We are all going to have to do this together if we're going to lift mathematics in this nation.
So I'm constructing one big theme, and that's partnerships are expansive. You all have noted the varying types of partnerships you have that range the entire constituency, from business and industry to higher ed, to school districts, to educators themselves, to higher ed. The last question I have as we round out our time together, and we'll start with Superintendent Baesler first. How can we enhance student voice in this conversation? And I'm going to ask that of each of the panelists, but Superintendent Baesler.
Wow, I love that question. The last 33 years that I've spent in K-12 education, I can't tell you how many meetings I've been in and panels I've been in. Sometimes I say it out loud, sometimes I just say it in my quiet head voice, but you have a bunch of adults sitting around in a room talking about students, about what's best for them. And we so too infrequently talk to students about what's best for them. I would encourage student panels and events like today. Most of you know, I know Superintendent Truitt and Superintendent Mackey are very well aware of the state superintendent student cabinet that I have, and it's been in existence for the last 8 years. I meet quarterly with them for a full day. They set the agenda. They tell me what's going on. These are students from 3rd grade all the way to freshmen. Some of them are at the Air Force Academy. Some of them are at West Point. They go on to colleges, Ivy League colleges. They come back and join me virtually. We have to ask them what's working. what's not working, what do we need to keep doing, what do we need to stop doing. So simply when any adult is putting together an agenda about something that is impacting students, we must include student panels in that conversation. And I encourage, if you're not doing it at a building, local, state, national level, start doing it.
Thank you. Superintendent Truitt, how can we elevate student voice?
Yeah, thanks for that particular question. So when I talk with students, and we have student panels frequently, and whenever we have an initiative like our Portrait of a Graduate initiative, we always include students. There's one common refrain from them, and that is, no matter how much they love school or love their teachers or feel supported, they always say school's not always relevant for them. And I think, not to go down a rabbit hole, but we're seeing this with some of our chronic absenteeism problems in our high schools coming out of the pandemic. It's not always relevant. And if I could just share this quick anecdote that illustrates what I'm saying. Many of your listeners will know who Bill Daggett is. And I had the privilege of working for him several years ago as a turnaround coach. And he and I were in a room with a bunch of algebra teachers in a high school, and they were contemplating whether or not they were going to allow the students to have the formulas on their test. Did they have to memorize the formulas, or could they bring them in and do application with the formulas? And of course, you can imagine, if you know anything about Bill, he was encouraging them to think about, why would you make them memorize those formulas? They can Google them at any time if you're thinking about real world applications for mathematics. Well, those teachers ended up deciding at the end of the day that they were not going to allow those students to come in with the formulas, and they were going to have to memorize them anyway. I mean, the recognition that the purpose of math, the way the future of work looks, that's kind of here already, we have to include student voice by making school relevant for kids. And what better place to start than with math?
Thank you. Superintendent Mackey, last word.
Well, same as above. We love talking to students. I try to do as many school visits as I can, as these colleagues do. And one of the things I always want to do in a school visit is talk to students. Now, that makes principals really nervous, and I used to be a principal, so I know. And they know too. Nobody wants you to talk to their students. But I want to talk to students and hear what students have to say. And we all do. And the thing is, I've been in so many schools, as my colleagues have here, where I do see students engaged in mathematics and they're having the time of their lives. So there is a way for students to enjoy math, to see the relevance, but we have to make that happen. We have to balance between that. There is some memorization, some algorithm we've talked about, but it ought to really be about how do I apply this and how do I make this fun, whether that's in robotics or that's in some kind of life explanation, applying it to a popular thing like a movie. But there's got to be a way to find a connection for students. And of course, as we know, it's been said, one of the problems is every student's going to have a different connection because they all have different interests. But they can, just like they can find, every student can go into a library and find something they enjoy reading. As I said before, from a great novel to Sports Illustrated. Well, there's something they can enjoy in mathematics, and we have to find that for every student and make sure they feel like they are a part of the decision-making process for their own lives. I mean, they really are. It's their lives. We're just giving them tools to be successful in life.
And we will end on that note. I want to say thank you to our panelists, Superintendent Baesler, Superintendent Truitt, Superintendent Mackey, and to our viewers, thank you. One word based on what you've learned today, I would encourage you to revisit your vision for advancing mathematics in your state and think about how you can enhance it. Have a great afternoon.
All right. Thank you.